Fascinating season for Arkansas football, all things considered. I mean, even bringing back Sam Pittman for his sixth year definitely did not get the approval of Fayetteville fans. I mean, according to some reports that I've read, his approval rating is as low as 15%, which I'm totally not entirely surprised about. I mean, when I did a video back in December when they announced that Sam Pittman would get another season, I had a lot of Arkansas fans be really pissed off about it. And I get where they're coming from, right? I'll be the first one to tell you, hey, having 6, 7 wins every season gets annoying. I understand the issue with the offensive line, considering that Sam Pittman, before he got the job at Arkansas, was one of the best offensive line coaches in all of college football. And for them to perform at the way that they have, it's inexplicable, quite frankly. And if that trend continues going into this season, it could spell a lot of trouble for Sam Pittman and the staff. Who, trust me, they're going to have a handful of question marks going into this season. I mean, I sit there and say to myself, I am a huge Kalen Green fan. I think out of all the quarterbacks in the SEC, I would argue he's probably the most underrated quarterback. And I think when you look at the stats, you say to yourself, well, he's got roughly 60% completion percentage, a little over 3,000 yards. And, he delivers the ball with some zip, good amount of touchdown passes. The interceptions are definitely an issue. I think to some degree he does try to do too much with certain plays. For example, I think one issue that Arkansas really kind of fell into this past season was just these long third down situations that were just become too cumbersome and difficult to navigate. And it was just got to a point where they're just relying way too much on their defense at times. And what I mean by that is, no, they're not necessarily the most talented group on defense. However, when you're out on the field for extended period of times in the game, especially the type of Petrino offense that they run, it's go, go, go. It's going to add up. And quite frankly, there's just going to be a lot of games where they're going to have to play in shootouts. And, that's typically not really ideal, especially if you want to win in the SEC. Now, granted, when Sam Pittman did get that extension in 2022, I'm sure in hindsight, they probably wish they didn't do that, but it kind of just adds on to this drama too, to some extent too, right? Because my general assessment of Arkansas football is, I've said this before, even back in December, I've said that they should be keeping him for another season. And I'm one of those guys that I think I want to see him succeed, right? Because I do think he really is a good guy. He does fit the culture of Arkansas football. He is a really strong recruiter, something that I don't think he really gets enough credit for. And all things considered, you can tell that these players play for him. And I get that that's cliche, and I get that, well, no shit, every player should play for their coach. But to me, it's in a different type of way. Now, granted, I know that there's going to be some setbacks this year, right? They're going to. I talked about the offensive line play a couple seconds ago. I think the depth, particularly on the defensive line, is going to be a serious question mark going into the season too, as they continue to navigate yet another serious, difficult schedule that they have coming on here. Because at the end of the day, you have those things that you're navigating too, but also I don't really think they dipped into NIL as well as they could be. I mean, I'd love for someone to comment to kind of elaborate on that status, but I would say for the most part, you're at the point where, if some kid exits from the portal, they're not necessarily bidding on these kids for them to come back. They pretty much know, hey, we know we're going to get outbid by another SEC school or by a larger school, so we're just going to let them go. Now, granted, they definitely got hurt with the transfer portal a little bit this year, and they're at the point where there's just so many different holes that they have to fill. Whether you want to talk about bringing in guys in the secondary, they lost a number of guys because they graduated. I talked about the defensive line. That's going to be some serious question marks. I think the receiver room is solid. However, they could use another receiver or two, especially if they do have some injuries or they just simply don't perform. The offensive line, you're going to be relying on a number of transfers to come in. And yes, they some of them do have some experience. However, they're going to have to get on it fast, because if they don't, it can be really another long season too. Because, like I said, I really do think Taylor Green is the real deal. He's got really an impressive arsenal. He is a dual threat guy. He can beat you at your feet. He throws with some zip, and I think if you're Bobby Petrino, he's the guy that you can definitely work with. It's just a matter of, can they really kind of put this all together to really navigate at least a 7 or 8 win season and show some evidence that they can really move forward and take that next step. Now, granted, if Arkansas didn't beat Tennessee last year, I wouldn't be surprised if Arkansas just ponied up the money and said, hey, you know what? This was a fun ride, a good experiment, but we're going to have to move on here. And I guess, granted, that's one of the arguments probably for keeping him, right? Is there was no one really obvious out there, at least last coaching cycle, where I would sit there and say to myself, that's the guy you need to go after. That's the guy you need to take a chance on. Now, granted, if it were come to that, I wouldn't be surprised if Arkansas football goes for a home run type of coach, because you look back at the past couple coaches they've had, and there's been some serious duds in there. I mean, I can go back and talk about Chad Morris, for example. I don't want to trigger too many Razorback fans, but nevertheless, I mean, the guys I think of are, probably most successful for him was probably Houston Nutt. I mean, I say successful in air quotes with Chad Morris, but nevertheless, I mean, it's just one of those issues where you're just going to be in a difficult position no matter what, because the Texases of the world, the Alabamas, the Georgias are all going to poach the top talent. You do want to keep some of the players that you have. However, you're getting outbid in the NIL space. And then, not to mention, you can only do so much in-state recruiting within the state of Arkansas. If you really want to take this program to the next level, you're going to have to figure out how to be able to recruit from places all outside of within the SEC footprint. And granted, they do have a couple 4-star guys coming in. Majority of them are 3s. Now, granted, I would say for the most part, it's been relatively consistent in terms of where the recruiting class has been. Now, this year, they're ranked 29th according to 24/7 Composite. They have a total of 24 signees. 3 of them were 4-stars, 21 3-star prospects. And then in 2024, they were 32nd. In 2023, they were 25th. And that was coming off of the best season that Arkansas had. And then they were 26th in 2022. So it's, for the most part, they've been kind of floating around in that upper 20s to, the upper 20s to the mid 30s there. And, it's definitely a tough place to win. And I think there definitely is some reason to be skeptical, to be questioning some of the things obviously pointed out between the wide receiver room. You don't know about the offensive line. Are they really going to take that step up? Definitely some current concerns about having depth. However, I do think there are some positives too that I think are being overlooked a little bit. For the most part, you do have a lot of consistency towards the coaching staff, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I do think they have some opportunities to really get better in that space. I mean, I think the linebacker room is pretty solid, all things considered. It's just, can they finally play with more discipline? Because I saw so many instances last year, particularly I go back and think of the Oklahoma State game, for example. A lot of the games towards the beginning of the year, where if they just played a little bit more disciplined and didn't have bullshit penalties throughout, we'd be talking about Arkansas as an 8-win team probably. Too, I mean, they're going to have some difficult games on the schedule too. I mean, I look through, you're going to have to go down to Oxford on September 13th. To me, that's going to be a pretty big question mark there. I look at the September 27th game where they host Notre Dame. If they could even look competitive in that game, I think that would be a really big boost for them I'd say especially in recruiting. If Notre Dame travels to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and they end up winning this game, that's going to be a big, big boost for them, and they need it in a really desperate way. So that's another game that I'm looking out for. And then obviously the SEC schedule is the SEC schedule. I mean, you're gonna play Texas A&M, you're gonna play Auburn, and for the most part too, a lot of those games are going to be at home, which is the big positive. However, when you go towards the end of the season, I think this is really the 3-game stretch that is really going to be defining Arkansas football. Now you go down to Death Valley and play LSU. That will, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being a night game. Then you're on the road to Texas, and then you finish the year at Missouri. I mean, that's going to be incredibly challenging and something that I'm definitely fascinated to kind of see as this goes along, because Taylor Green is the type of guy where I definitely think the coaching staff sees something in him. I think Bobby Petrino does. I get that the offensive scheme that Petrino runs is a little bit more complex than other college football offensive schemes. However, they really do have a number of nice pieces. I think they've improved a little bit in the running back room. They are starting to put this all together too, and I think the receiver room, they definitely have some pieces in there, at least a legit number 1 and 2. I mean, granted, I think it would have been ideal for them to at least go a little bit harder in the transfer portal for that spot, but at the same time too, they just have so many different holes to the point where they can only try so hard at so many different spots. And I think you see that within the rankings too. I mean, they're 15th in the SEC in terms of recruiting as well, where it's not that Arkansas is necessarily a bad team. They just have good but not great talent all over the football field. And it's just going to be a matter of, can Sam Pittman and Bobby Petrino and this defensive staff kind of compile this all together